There he is.
Pretty good. How are you?
Good, man. Sorry about that. So we're connected now. Hey, we were talking about the quarterback situation for the Arizona Cardinals, and watching some of these guys, and Clayton Tune, who he hit half of his passes, he connected on, and he was running quite a bit. But then, we saw Colt McCoy, we saw David Blau just for a little bit. But when you look at these two quarterbacks, specifically David Blau and Clayton Tune, where would you give the edge if you needed to back up to Colt McCoy?
Oh man, I don't know. It's really hard to say. I mean, it's even harder for someone like me to give an opinion on this because I know how the business side of this works and I know how the politics side of this works. And those are all things that matter. Clayton Tune is a draft pick of this new general manager and this new head coach. He's a young guy. He's making less money. He hasn't been in the league as long as David Blau. And all of those things matter. Now, if you're probably talking about, who gives me the absolute best chance to win if Colt McCoy does in fact start the season and he gets hurt, I would say probably David Blau might give you a little bit better chance to win. But I mean, ultimately, without sounding like a negative Nancy here, I don't think it matters. This team's not going to win football games even when they have Kyler Murray on the field. So it's really just about, do you want to try to put these reps that I would call an investment in the money side, that investment as well, into a guy that you drafted because you feel like at some point down the line was the organization? I would, adding all of those things up would probably go with Clayton Tune.
And all that being said, Rudy, I hear what you're saying, but not in that locker room, it's going to be hard enough for these guys to win. And I know they're in a rebuilding mode, but if you have, in my opinion, the experienced guy there that's been there, done that, seen it, as hard as it's going to be to win if Colt goes down, you got to make sure if you're that ownership to understand that this as hard as it's going to be to win the games, you got to have a guy that can at least get you in and out of the huddle and get the plays off. I would think that's why I side with David Blau.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you on that, and I think that's all true. But I mean, I would tell you this: without being at practice and without watching the all 22 tape on a daily basis, it seems to me like Clayton's operating decent. It seems to me like he's able to get you in and out of the huddle. It seems to me like he's able to make all of the throws that you need, and even has a little bit of athleticism to him to make a play. I think there's no doubt that David Blau has been there, done that. He started games, I believe, before, or at least played significant minutes. So I think all of that stuff matters. There's also no doubt that in professional football, you want to try to win, and even if you're probably not gonna, you got to still put your best team out there to at least appease those guys in the locker room and make them feel like you're doing everything that you can to win, because those guys' career and their future, is on the line too. Look, I guess this is a really bad answer, Dan, but again, what I'm saying is at the end of the day, I just don't think it matters. I think it's one half dozen to the other. David Blau, Clayton Tune. I would even put Colt McCoy in that group. Does it really matter? I think all of those guys, as far as NFL standards go, they're probably all just average guys.
Rudy Carpenter is our guest on the Toyota guest line, the right Toyota guest line. I'm real curious, Rudy. I know it's very vanilla through the course of preseason, and nobody really game plans for anything. But can you surmise what you have seen out of this Arizona Cardinal team, at least in the first two preseason games, that would give you hope that they could win 5 or 6 games this season? Or is there no hope?
Well, you never want to say there's no hope, because in the game of football, that ball is shaped funky and it bounces all kinds of crazy ways.
Yep.
And as you guys know, it's the NFL, and anything can happen. You can get a crazy bounce here or there, and all of a sudden, a couple of games look totally different. But for me, when you look at this Arizona roster and you compare it to other rosters in the NFL, to me, what you see is they just don't have an abundance of explosive talent. You don't see the explosiveness on the field. You don't see the speed and the agility. You don't see that on the field in which you see with other teams. You can see the commitment that the Kansas City Chiefs have made to finding explosive talent, even when they got rid of a guy like Tyreek Hill, right? The Rice kid, I think he came from either SMU or Houston, explosive. Pacheco is explosive. Travis Kelce in his own right is explosive. I mean, they have explosive talent. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles, they have explosive talent. You look at, even the Cincinnati Bengals with their wide receiver core, Jamar Chase and Higgins, and even Mixon in his own way. They have explosive talent. The Arizona Cardinals just don't have that. And I think even the explosive, talented guys that they do have and or they drafted, whether it's their fault or not, have just been a total waste. Guys like Isaiah Simmons, right? He's bounced all over the place. To me, he was horrible in this last game, and I don't want to blame it all on him because they've done him a total disservice, in bouncing around and playing him out of position. And look, I don't want to, say negative things about Steve Keim. I think he did a lot of great things when he was here with the Arizona Cardinals. You see him over the last few weeks moving around, going and visiting guys like, Reddick at the Eagles, training camp. And it's like, yeah, great. He's a former first-round pick who's doing well for the Eagles, I guess. But even when you guys had him here in Arizona, you had him bouncing around and playing all out of position as well. So to me, unfortunately, the NFL, the talent matters, and the explosiveness and the speed and the height and the weight and the length of guys and how fast they are, all of that stuff
3
matters,
minutes.
but they have to be able to play fast, and guys usually play fast when they know what they're doing and they're dialed into their position and they know exactly what they're doing mentally on every play. That way they're in a position where they can just read and react, see ball, get ball. And right now, I just think on the defensive side of the ball, the Arizona Cardinals don't have that. And obviously in Kyler Murray, they do. But outside of Kyler Murray on the offensive side, I can't really name a guy that you can point to and just say, wow, he's a really, really, really explosive talent. I mean, I think the guy that scored their only touchdown this week was Greg Dortcher, and I think he was he an undrafted free agent for them? So, right. He came out a few years ago. So, to me, this is a talent problem for the most part with the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, Rudy, I second the motion on Isaiah Simmons. I mentioned earlier about the lack of depth was noticeable with this Cardinals team when you watch the depth of the Chiefs. So here they go, Saturday night, the final preseason game against the Vikings. You got 2 weeks after that. Strategically wise, as far as evaluating, getting guys in and out of the huddle and playing and all the above, how would you go about this last preseason game against the Vikings on Saturday night, knowing you got 2 weeks before the real ammo starts to fire?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, for every organization, not just the Cardinals, you want to make sure you get out of this last preseason game super healthy. You obviously don't want any of your starters to get hurt, probably not even going to play. And then you don't want your important depth guys to get nicked up or to get hurt at all. So that's the most important thing, is to get out of that game, super healthy with no
1 minute, 1 minute
injuries. I think that, the bottom part of this roster, let's just call it, spots 45 to 53. I would even maybe go more than that, which might sound crazy to most people, and say roster spots 40 to 53 and probably all the practice squad guys too. I think as the course of the season moves along, you're probably going to see a lot of those roster spots turn over. Some guys make the active roster initially, end up on practice squad later in the season. some guys on practice squad get bumped up to the active roster some point during the season. And then I think probably the most important part, for the Arizona Cardinals coming up over the next 2 weeks is going to be what they do on the waiver wire. I would imagine that their scouting department, their pro scouting department, and their GM, Monty Ossenfort, I guarantee you they have a plan in place. They got a bunch of guys circled that they'll be watching play games, guys who they feel are on other teams who may get cut, that they believe they can put in a waiver claim on and hopefully get and acquire some talent, on final cut down date. So to me, I think that's probably the most significant thing that's going to happen, or, the most newsworthy things that are going to happen over the next 2 weeks is number one, obviously, who the Arizona Cardinals cut. Number two, who they can get back on practice squad. And really probably the most important thing is what happens around the rest of the league. What kind of guys get cut? What kind of veteran players get cut that they can bring in here on a waiver claim? They can pay the veteran minimum to, and guys that can, contribute at a high level. One example I would give that, might not make any sense. This is not a shameless plug for my own business, but my agency represents a guy named Chris Lamons. Unfortunately for Chris Lamons, the thing that he's known best for right now is getting into a fight with Alvin Kamara in Las Vegas. But he's a guy that's been a starter for the Kansas City Chiefs. He's been a starter on some very, very good football teams, played in some Super Bowls. Last year he got cut right after the AFC Championship game. But he's a guy that, because of the trouble he got into, signed late with the Indianapolis Colts in training camp. Because of their situation, they may or may not be able to keep him, but that's a guy who's been a starter as a corner in the NFL. He's been a very good contributor on special teams in the NFL. He's a number 2, number 3 corner who can go in the slot and cover your best slot receiver on any football team in America. I would imagine the Arizona Cardinals are going to be looking for a lot of guys like that, guys that they don't have to make long-term commitments to, guys that can come in and play and contribute right away, both on special teams, and on the offensive or defensive side of the ball, and guys who, for NFL standards, are relatively cheap. You don't have to pay them, $3, $4, $5 million a year. You can pay them the rookie minimum and call it, 1.2, 1.3 million bucks.
Rudy, great stuff, man. That's interesting. We appreciate your time today. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Rudy. Appreciate that. It's Rudy Carpenter joining us. Nice plug for one of his guys. I mean, it sounds like no-brainer. Yeah. It's no-brainer.
It's an interesting story.
Absolutely. We'll talk about it after this break.
I'm good with that.